Hola a todos, bienvenidos a Paredro, el podcast de libros, autores y demás actores del mundo literario. Otro capítulo en que deberíamos comenzar más bien diciendo Welcome to Paredro, porque les traemos nuestra segunda entrevista realizada en inglés para nuestros lectores hispanoparlantes bilingües que quieren escuchar a algunos de sus autores favoritos en su lengua, ya sea materna o a través, en este caso, del inglés. Para el día de hoy traemos esta entrevista que ya habíamos prometido en nuestro primer capítulo con Tatiana Tibuliak, y me refiero a una entrevista que le realicé hace más o menos 2 años, esto es en enero del 2021, al novelista norteamericano Jonathan Franzen, al gigantesco y monumental novelista Jonathan Franzen, y esto se realizó con ocasión de la visita que él realizaría para el Hey Festival Cartagena, precisamente en el año de 2022. En este caso estuvimos hablando sobre la primera novela de su trilogía, que está en este momento en camino. Me refiero al primer tomo que se llama Encrucijadas, un retrato sobre lo que es la cultura norteamericana hacia 1971, es decir, luego de esa sensación de que todo va a cambiar en los 60 y llega la resaca de los 70 preguntándose sobre lo que es el progreso. Se trata de una novela que visita a la familia Hildebrandt desde Ross a su esposa Marion y por supuesto Clem, Becky y Perry, que fue mi personaje favorito. Y sobre todo cuando nos enfrentamos a Franzen, pues vemos lo que es ese mundo novelesco y lo que la lectura literaria nos permite, es decir, meternos de lleno, absorbernos por una trama. Jonathan Franzen nació en Western Springs, en Illinois, en 1959 y fue elegido en 1996 entre los mejores jóvenes novelistas norteamericanos por la prestigiosa revista Granta. Hasta esa fecha había escrito las novelas Ciudad 27 y Movimiento Fuerte, pero la eclosión de su enorme talento narrativo tuvo lugar en 2001 con la aparición de Las Correcciones, que marcó un punto de inflexión en su trayectoria. Obtuvo el National Book Award y el premio James Tate Black Memorial. Fue finalista de los premios Pulitzer y Penn Faulkner y fue descubierto por millones de lectores en todo el mundo. El espaldarazo definitivo le llegó en el año 2010 con Libertad, una novela que fue objeto de los más encendidos elogios por parte de un amplísimo elenco de críticos y expertos de los más diversos países. En España obtuvo el premio a la mejor novela del año, otorgado por los lectores de la revista Qué Leer. 5 años más tarde publicó Pureza, que de nuevo lo consagró como uno de los grandes escritores norteamericanos. Es además autor de 5 obras de no ficción: Cómo estar solo, Zona templada, Más afuera, The Cross Project, El fin de la Tierra, y es miembro de la American Academy of Arts and Letters, de la Académie der Künste de Berlín y la Ordre des Arts de Letras francesas. Los dejamos entonces con Encrucijadas, una novela que recomiendo mucho para las vacaciones que vienen ahorita de diciembre y por supuesto siempre que quieran enfrentarse a la buena literatura. En esta charla vamos a hablar sobre lo que es la inmersión en los personajes, lo que es la trama novelesca, pero también otra cosa que es bien importante y es el interés que Franzen tiene en un país como Colombia. Así que, sin mayores preámbulos, bienvenidos.
Hello, Jonathan. How are you? Nice to meet you.
I'm looking forward to the interview rather than dreading it.
I'm very happy to be here talking with you.
Likewise.
I just love this novel, Jonathan, and there's nothing like finishing a novel that restores and helps keep up the hopes on literature, on emotional living and living through language. Honestly, it's been quite a while since I've been so sucked in a novel. So thank you. I tell you that as a reader before being an interviewer.
Sucking in is what I want to do with the reader. That's in fact my number one goal is to draw you in, and then just you're in the world and you're not thinking about anything else. That's to create that experience has become my main goal.
So, Jonathan, let's begin with this, if you like. Crossroads is the first part of a trilogy that you've already announced, right? Why 3 books in this project? 3 books between 20 years of each other, and which will be those themes that you will be working on for practically 60 years?
Oh gosh, I of course now have regrets about having announced a trilogy. Everyone I hear from about the book feels obliged to say, I can't wait for the next volume. And I can't either, but these books take me a long time to write. I'm not one of those writers who publishes a novel every 2 years. And even though I am imagining the subsequent volumes will have some of the same characters, they have to work independently as novels. I was trying to write in Crossroads a book that would work even if nothing came after it, because after all, I could be hit by a bus tomorrow. And I want the other two volumes to feel that way too, that they each have their own integrity as a book, and that takes time. The overarching title I put on it when I was selling a single book with 3 parts to a publisher was A Key to All Mythologies. That is, of course, a reference to George Eliot's Middlemarch. And I was interested initially irrational belief, the stories we live by that are not provable, that are essentially mythologies. I think that will remain a theme. I started with Christianity because I was going back to 1971 when, for good liberal people, Christianity was still a viable mythology. That has changed in the last 50 years, and it's interesting to me that it has changed. I will be tracing what happened to that mythology in subsequent decades, and that's about all I can tell you.
Okay, but thank you, because that's enough, and that makes me eager to also wait for the first volume. But I think you've already answered a bit of what I was about of my next question, which is, you've normally written about contemporary characters or families, right? And perhaps in Freedom you came back a bit to explain, but normally you've been working about contemporary characters. But in this time, for the Hildebrand family, you've decided to go back to the 70s in the Midwest. So I was always thinking, why travel to Backview? Why the 23rd of December, and why 1971?
It had to do with the ages of the characters. I wanted the book came out of a person I met maybe 5 years ago. He was in his 70s, and when I decided to build a novel around him, I imagined him as a young man. So if I was talking about a man in his 70s in the present day, he would have been around 20 in 1970. Why December 23rd? I was, for the first time, consciously trying to write a family novel. There have been families in my other novels, but there are families in most novels. So I don't think of those other books particularly as family novels. This time I wanted to investigate a family moving through time over 50 years, with subsequent generations, with patterns repeating themselves. Because it was a family novel, it made sense to set the action on a holiday. Yeah, and in modern life, if you want to get all the members of a nuclear family together, you're going to look at a wedding, or you're going to look at a holiday. By the time the kids leave the home, they're not present. You can't have scenes between the family members in the same way. So it was kind of a no-brainer to do it at Christmas time, because that is the big holiday.
We read about the 6-member Hildebrand family and the crossroads they meet in their quest for personal freedom, right? But even if they eager it with the same intensity, their forms of acting to reach it differ enormously, right? To which group of characters, Jonathan, parents or sons or daughters, did you feel more acquainted to?
I got to know all of them, I think, equally well. There's particular emphasis on the parents in Crossroads. This is really their book. The original thing that happened, the reason there is a Hildebrandt family, is that a very painfully innocent young man from an isolated Mennonite community meets a sophisticated city girl who doesn't tell him the truth about herself. Everything follows from his innocence and her concealment of her history. Is that familiar to me? Well, yes, to the extent that I myself was once a fairly innocent man from the Midwest, young man from the Midwest. The concealment of a history, not so much. I don't know what else to say. But the young people are always useful in a book because they're falling in love. They're making crucial decisions about what the rest of their lives will look like. That's inherently dramatic. A love story with a young person, that's always fun to read about. That's all familiar territory to me. I was a very morally righteous young man like Clem, had my first kiss around Christmas time in 1975. Clem and Becky are familiar, and Perry, I don't know where Perry came from. I knew a guy in high school who was a little like Perry.
Well, this is not a question, but I have to tell you that I felt so much pity, and I was about to cry over Perry. What I mean, it was so tough to see him, but I don't want to get outside of the question. Maybe we will have time after I could ask you. But about Jonathan, would you say that it's the meeting of a very innocent religious guy who just came from the Navajo country and meets the city girl? It's important for readers to know that there's a musical reference to Crossroad Blues, right? By Robert Johnson,
Yes.
which is meeting, crossing with the devil, that is with temptation, with the possibility of choosing. Was this reference, or was this presence of the music, was it previous to the importance of Mennonite religion in your novel, or Mennonite religion or God, or did it appear after? Which came first, the song or the literary motives?
The Mennonite stuff was there from the beginning. It has to do with this person I met 5 years ago who came from a Mennonite family, and I'm interested in the Mennonites. I have very mixed feelings about them. I admire the purity of their religious practice, but I don't like what they are doing environmentally in parts of South America and Central America. And I don't like the patriarchal structure of some of those communities. So I have very mixed feelings, but I was interested in it because it's such a radical form of Christian faith nowadays. It's possibly the most radical one there is, and so that was there from the beginning. I knew Russ came from a Mennonite family. At a certain point in the book, Marion encounters Satan, and she makes a choice. That was completely accidental. The business with Crossroads, I needed a name for the youth group. And I spent a day or two making lists of possible names, and I thought, well, Crossroads, that sounds right. And then I thought of the Cream song, and then it just kind of fell into place because Russ thought he was cool, he was hip in the 50s, and he was listening to these American blues masters, and that tension between an earlier kind of coolness, 50s coolness, the Beats coolness, and what grew up in the late 60s, that becomes essential in the book. I just discovered all that. It was not planned.
Because that has to do with perhaps my next question, Jonathan, because sometimes I feel, or I felt reading the book, that one of the main themes of Crossroads is the problem of communication between 3 generations, or rather than about talking and understanding 3 generations, beginning from 1920 with Russ's father when finishing at the 1970s. The deeds of the fathers, but also their punishment, which is what happens in the book. Can we ever get rid of our parents' actions?
Parents certainly you have to come to terms with them. You have to, if you're a son, the father is a powerful presence in the house. And you may love the father, but you may also want to vanquish the father. You admire him, but you want to be admired. One of the reasons family keeps occurring in my book is that parents are inescapable. Even if you are an adopted child, even if you were a foundling, there is some kind of parent or parents in everyone's life. Inescapable circumstances are attractive to the novelist, especially nowadays, when in so many other areas of our life we have infinite personal freedom. We can reinvent ourselves in any number of ways. but you can't reinvent your parents. And you can't really change your fundamental relationship with them. And if you are looking for difficulty, if you're looking for human drama, you tend to look in places where you can't escape something. And I would say parents are very high on the list of what you can't escape. Parents and death are the two big ones.
Drugs are a major theme in your novel, right? I mean, consuming, selling, hiding, experimenting. It is also for adults, and we know the Crossroads blues in the CD with Francis and Russ, but it's also for young adults, meaning Becky, Perry, and all the Crossroad group, basically. It helps in their quest of freedom, and it also serves as a mean to personal and emotional truth. But it's not the 60s, right? It's not 1960, it's 1970s. So I was wondering every time, does your novel portray any change in its cultural importance or cultural use?
Y no olviden que pueden conseguir Encrucijadas, así como todas las otras novelas de Jonathan Franzen, a través de buscalibre.com, la librería online más grande de Latinoamérica, con más de 5 millones de títulos. Muchos de estos les llega en un día. O sea que si no habían oído de esta novela o hasta ahora conocen a Franzen, mañana mismo pueden estar recibiéndola.
I was uninterested in doing cultural commentary. I could not be less interested in doing a social history of the early 70s. I used to be more interested in that stuff. Now I am 100% about the characters and their stories. I want to set it in a realistic time, and it is realistic. There were a lot of drugs in the suburbs in the early 70s. We think of it late 60s as being the time when everyone was experimenting with drugs, but that was really mostly on college campuses in places like San Francisco and New York. You had the Velvet Underground, you had the Grateful Dead. It didn't really percolate down into American society as a whole until the 70s. So that's actually culturally, historically accurate. You have mentioned freedom a few times, and you know I once wrote a book called Freedom. So I have to say that in general, I don't do a lot of conceptual thinking about a novel. I'm mostly trying to figure out what the characters want. That's the difficult task always when I'm developing a book. What do they want? But I do, of course, try to have some framework of meaning for the story. And when I'm developing those stories for the characters, I'm comparing them to what I'm trying to do as a whole. And I have to tell you that the concept of freedom never occurred in 2 years of notes about the book. It's just not, it wasn't a concept for me. I mean, the nature of being a good person, that was a concept. Relationship with God, that was certainly a concept. But freedom itself, not so much.
Perhaps I should be talking more about liberation rather than freedom.
That's right. It goes to what I was saying earlier about family being the thing you can't escape. Marion imagines being liberated from Russ. Russ certainly imagines being liberated from not only Marion, but his entire family. Clem is trying to create space for his own individuality. In regard to his father, he's trying to liberate himself from an earlier admiration of his father, or he's actually painfully liberated when his father humiliates him. I think it's less applicable with Becky and Perry. Full stop.
There's something about Perry that I just connected, perhaps as a Colombian reader, Jonathan, that there's this moment where he seems to be like the first cocaine addict of the Midwest, because they don't even know the name of the drug. Marion says he's doing what, and he doesn't even know how to do it. And I was just disconnecting because this is by 1972, right?
Right.
So this is by 1972. So it was very difficult, well, but not difficult, but easy for me to connect with this other novel that I think you know, which is a Colombian novel, The Sound of Things Falling, by our good friend Juan Gabriel, which is basically the war on drugs and Nixon by 1973. And I saw this symmetry or relation between one character that's starting to do something which he knows about, and on the other part, it's when this American, which is actually Mike Barbieri, the first drug commercial, let's say, that starts to hijack cocaine. Is there any symmetry or interest between you two on this specific topic, perhaps historical or fictional?
It's funny you should ask. The Hay Festival invited me to come to Cartagena again. It didn't seem like a very good time to travel. It still doesn't seem like a very good time to travel. But I agreed for three reasons. One was that Juan Gabriel and my friend Daniel Kehlmann were going to be there. And I don't get to see them very often, and it seemed like a fun thing to do. Another reason was that Colombia is arguably the best country in the world for birds. I've traveled there 2 times before for birds, but there are always many new things to see. So I thought, okay, I can do a birding trip. But the third reason was that I am interested in Colombia in particular. And when Perry got into Coke, I started thinking about Clem in South America, and I feel that the 100 years of Colombian history are bound up in the tragedy of American imperialism, and that this might be worth investigating, perhaps in the subsequent volume. So yes, there is some connection there. Juan Gabriel was writing that novel from within Colombia, and coming to terms with, I don't know, a couple of decades of Colombian history having to do with the drug trade, having to do with the political violence. I would not compete with a Colombian writer in telling that story. Nevertheless, it is interesting to me. And this will be my 4th trip to Colombia. I've had a great time each time I've been there. I think there's something wonderful, but also tragic about the history of Colombia and even the present day. And so, I am interested. And it's not accidental that Perry gets into cocaine. No, it's not a coincidence that Perry gets into cocaine. It was a very unusual drug in the suburbs in the early 1970s. I know that the war on drugs started quite early, but it didn't become a fashionable drug in the US until the late 70s. It was what the Rolling Stones were doing. It was what the Grateful Dead were doing, and probably already in the recording studios in Los Angeles. When I listen to that music from the early 70s, I can see every player in the studio totally coked up. The precision and speed of the guitars in the music from that era just reeks of coke. But it was unusual for Perry to get into it, and it would be a very, very bad drug for Perry.
It's incredible, and I got to feel the nerves of Perry. I mean, going to visit the Navajo to buy some peyote and all the things. I mean, I really suffered with him. It reminded me a bit of, this has nothing to do with, but a bit with that Johnny Cash, that first musician, drug addict musician that has no idea how to handle it, and he's just doing and walking like 100 miles to get to her wife. It was very shocking and understanding what was about to come from here. So I'm glad that I could make that connection. Jonathan, some of the sons and daughters in your novel tend to represent the moral absolutism. As Clem, he wanted to go to Vietnam just to show his father, or Becky, like a vengeance of what Shirley's money, etc. But that absolutism does not help them a lot. It's just like they're eager to do it, but it's not like they help it. It seems to be a backlash of many of the dreams developed in the 60s, perhaps. I don't know. But in these current and turbulent times, Jonathan, these times of cancellation culture, of moral absolutism, do you think there's anything we can learn from these characters that you portray?
I think there's broadly a lot we can learn from literature. A little history. There was a lot of moralism in 19th century fiction. Great as Middlemarch is, there's never any question about who's good and who's bad. and there's never any question about what is good and what is bad. Beginning in the late 19th century and exploding in the 20th century was a radical uncertainty about what actually is good. This is why, although I am very attracted to the form and I'm very attracted to 19th century novels because of their confident realism and because they really draw you into this wonderful story about real characters. But intellectually, I'm much more aligned with the 20th century, which is a radical doubt about what is the right thing. That's partly because I've gotten older. I wrote my first few novels certain that I knew what was right and what was wrong. Then I went through a divorce, and no one can go through a divorce with that confidence unshaken. And I became much more attracted to writers like Alice Munro, where often it's when characters do precisely the morally wrong thing that in some deeper way they're doing the right thing. And they also are constantly questioning themselves about what is right. And that is the province, I think, of literature as we now have it. People aren't all good or all bad. The concept of cancel culture imagines, well, that person is simply a bad person, therefore we will cancel him. You don't have to be much past the age of 30 to ask, well, is he really all bad? And are the people who are canceling him really all good? Those are the questions that literature should invite us to ask.
Well, I think that answer just anticipates some of my final questions, Jonathan. You see, I was wondering, in your 1996 essay, Why Bother, you defend the importance of the social novel, right? Do you still share the same stance?
Sorry to disagree with you.
Can a novel as world type of writing defend us from intolerance, populism, or lack of empathy?
No olviden que pueden comprar Encrucijadas a través de buscalibre.com y les puede llegar mañana mismo. Así que aprovechen y pueden incluso terminar de oír esta entrevista ya con el libro en la mano.
The way I understand Why Bother, and everyone is entitled to his own opinion of that essay, is that I was letting go of the notion that a novel could change the world. I was letting go of a feeling of responsibility to describe social reality. I was moving in the direction of character and story. I was flipping the priorities. Instead of the characters serving the social story, the social stuff was only there to the extent that it was important to the characters. That's how I remember that essay. It's been a long time since I read it, but I think that was what I was saying. And that I've only gone further down that road. And finally, in Crossroads, I pay no attention at all to the contemporary world. It ends in 1974, so I'm completely disengaged from that project at the moment. You can still find similarities between 1971 and 2021, 2022. They're accidental. That was not of interest to me.
Your novel, Jonathan, and your style is a dive in emotional and psychological worlds of various characters undergoing severe changes. I heard you say in an interview with David Remnick for The New Yorker that these books really are icebergs. There is 90% below the surface, which is figuring out the characters. Perhaps you've already mentioned this in your last answer, but can novels change the way we understand others in the street, in politics, or in our communities?
It's nice to think that if everyone read more novels, we would be more sympathetic, empathetic with people who are not like us. Unfortunately, I feel that the audience for serious novels is kind of self-selected. People who already are interested in understanding different kinds of people who already have some empathy for others, enjoy reading novels. And the people who want to spend their lives on Twitter and make absolute moral judgments and decline to have empathy for the people they're canceling, empathy with the people they're canceling, they're probably not reading novels. I fear that what you and I are writing for an audience of people who are already converted. It's good that that audience exists. It gives me hope that people can achieve empathy, that people can accept moral complexity. But I am skeptical of the notion that the novel can create that in someone who has no interest in it.
Even amidst Jonathan, the tragic and the unfortunate, my final taste as a reader is hope with your novel. Amidst unsolved mysteries and questions, one might say, I had the impression of being bit by optimism reading your novel. And I thought about that famous line on Foster Wallace, which says, fiction is about what it is to be a fucking human being. Would you agree with that? Hope, optimism, and possibility of tracing again our lives?
You can't be a complete pessimist and write novels. And you certainly can't embark on writing a trio of novels without a certain degree of optimism. I don't think of it in, maybe what you're picking up on is my hope that I can write 2 more books that are equal to this one. And at a deeper level, a hope that someone might enjoy this, a hope that it might find an audience, a hope that there are people who are still interested in stories like this. I am very, very pessimistic about the future of the planet. I've written about this too. In the big picture, what do I have to look forward to? Well, I'll die soon, and I'll be lucky if the planet doesn't die before I do. That's a grim picture. I think to continue to interest yourself the amazing complexity of human life, I think to continue to embark on projects to render some of that complexity, that's my form of hope. It's shorter term, but it's there.
Jonathan, thank you. And I have just one last question. Is there anything you learned from contemporary American families by visiting and living with the Hildebrands?
One thing that was fun about writing about 1971 was that no one had cell phone. No one had social media. If you wanted to be in touch with someone, you had to find a payphone and then hope that someone was at the other end. There weren't even answering machines. And man, is it fun as a novelist to write about a time when human interaction was mostly in person. And I felt a certain sorrow for the contemporary family where everyone is on their device and you can escape from the people around you just by looking down at your phone. So I didn't learn that. I already knew that about the contemporary world, but I felt a certain sorrow for the world we now live in, and I felt a great happiness that I didn't have to write about it in this book.
Jonathan, that's it. Those are my questions. Thank you very much.